Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast, where we aim to inspire and motivate people to never give up on themselves or their dreams. We will chat with highly successful people from all walks of life and discuss what motivates and drives them to successfully attack life head on and never give up. Welcome to episode number 57 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is building relationships. Our quote of the day comes to us from Gary Vaynerchuk. Saying hello doesn't have a return on investment. It's about building relationships. I'm very excited to bring you today's episode. Our guest is an up-and-coming, highly motivated, and extremely driven individual. When it comes to knowing what he wants and then putting in the effort required, he gets it. It is hard not to feel his positivity and his love for what he does, and it's even harder not to be inspired by it. It would be difficult to find a picture of him on the internet without his huge smile or double thumbs up. It is my pleasure to introduce Michael Gebben. Michael, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
Appreciate you having me, buddy. This is going to be an exciting time.
So the first question we ask everybody is, are you ready to make it happen today?
I am ready to make it happen.
Awesome. So the number one objective of our podcast is to motivate and inspire listeners to never give up or quit on themselves. So I was curious if you have either a story about perseverance or perhaps a challenging time that tested you, but you didn't quit and you kept on going.
Yeah, man. I mean, I think that I've definitely got a number of stories because when people have asked me once, one of my unique kind of differentiators, I believe it is my ability to kind of keep getting knocked down and getting back up over and over and over and over and over again. So, in my video production side of things, when I started to also make this shift into more personal development and coaching and training and things like that, what was happening is I live in a town about 26,000 people. I started my company right out of high school, no college, didn't really know what I was doing, just kind of fell into all this video production things. It actually started with funeral slideshows, and I filmed a wedding, and I just got into doing all these different things. But that was in 2004, 2005 when I really got going. But then by about 2010, I was pretty overwhelmed. I didn't have, great mentorship or actually coaching or training myself. And so I was just all over the map. And essentially I was about to kind of stop it all. I just was so fed up with everything. I really wasn't proud of most of the work that was going out the door because I kind of give this analogy sometimes of this, all you can eat buffet or sushi chef. Well, my company was called Gebben's Total Video, and it exactly is what it says, which is, we did anything for everybody that related to video. Well, that's kind of like the all you can eat buffet until I became this sushi chef where I had this one thing that I did really, really well. There was too many things going on. I could not keep up. And essentially the work we were putting out, like I said, I barely wanted to look at it when I got done with it. And so what happened was it was actually, which I know many an entrepreneur's story, Tim Ferriss's book, The 4-Hour Work Week, I read in late 2010, and there was just so many aha moments. But one of the things I did is I started asking my couples, essentially, what do you watch? Like, you've had your DVD for 6 to 9 months to a year now, and they would say they watched the same day edit, which the same day edit was this thing I shot that day and showed that night at the reception. But essentially, I had all these other videos because everybody in the industry, all these people were telling me to do these things, and they weren't even watching any of these other videos. And so then for me, I just kind of had this aha and said, and I call it now, I didn't call it back in the day, but I call it this my way decision, where essentially I said, I'm going to edit, shoot, speak, dress. I'm going to do everything my way. Now, when I dealt with my clients, I wasn't rude about it or anything, but I just thought, what do I have to lose? Like, I want to enjoy this. And so the one thing I love is this same day edit. The one thing my clients seem to love is the same day edit. So I'm dropping pretty much everything else. And it was in doing that, within those next 12 months was when I got to actually work with Tim Ferriss, Tony Robbins, been to Sir Richard Branson's island 4 times. Like, all these crazy things started to happen. And it was just crazy. But it was like I became crystal clear on what I was great at, what I was going to say no to, what I was going to say yes to. And I think through that certainty and through that confidence, that allowed me then to, on certain levels, I talk about massive imperfect action a lot. Like I just reached out to these people, but you mentioned right off the beginning, before we get turned on here, give and take. Like for me, I've always been a giver first. And so for me, when I reached out to Tim Ferriss, it was not to take from him. It was his book gave me something that lit up the inner entrepreneur inside of me. And so I saw he was having this launch party for the 4-Hour Body and thought, well, I'd love to use my skill set of video. Maybe I'll get to meet him. That was one thing I was actually thinking. But then beyond that, I was like, I can give back. I have this talent and skill set. I can give back and essentially do this video for him. And that what then snowballed all these other things happening. I was just telling you, I was just at Lewis Howes' Summit of Greatness. And I met Lewis in December of 2010 at Tim's launch party. And so, in doing that, in doing things, quote unquote, my way, I actually found that I was serving my customers at a level I had really never served them before. And I see that a lot, no matter really what industry, is that people come to you with their problems and challenges. And just because you can doesn't mean you should. So you might have the ability, but is it really in your zone of genius? Can you really get them the result? Can you really do your best with that thing that they want? Because I see so many people go, they'll ask them to do something, and in the head of the person, they're going, here we go again, another one of these. But because they'll give them money, because they'll pay, they say yes. And then they sign up for procrastination, complaining, not doing a great job, and all these other things. And so, that was a big shift for me that really, on so many levels, took me in a whole different direction.
Well, that was a long answer, but it was filled with a lot of great stuff. And one of the things that stood out is, you talked about doing everything until you became a sushi chef. And it reminds me of master of all trades, jack of none. And I think, unfortunately, when people start businesses, you try to do anything and everything for anybody. And you don't do it in a selfish way of saying, let me get all the money. No, you're doing it actually for all the right reasons, which is you saying, look, I want to get my company out there. I need to get some sales, need to get some exposure. But one of the things we found with our podcast is it's when that person identifies that focus and they take that or have that lane change or that switch, that's where a lot of the great action and a lot of the great results happen. So I appreciate you sharing that with us. And one of the things you talked about, I believe you said massive perfect action. Is that correct?
Yeah, MIA, I call it massive imperfect action.
So I'm glad you corrected, because massive imperfect is very different than massive perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. Big difference. Huge.
A few episodes, we had a gentleman by the name of Jeff Woods on, and he is the host of the podcast, The One Thing. And he works for the gentleman that Gary Keller that wrote the book, The One Thing.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And they talk about the one thing. And then JLD, who has an amazing podcast, he's been on our show, and I was fortunate to be on his. He talks about focusing on one thing, follow one course until success. And I think clearly the success that you've had is when you took that change of going from everything to a very specific thing and then mastering that and doing it well. So I was curious, was it somebody that introduced you to that, the concept, the idea, or was it just something that kind of happened as your business was, I don't want to say floundering, but as you were having some challenges?
You mean the MIA part or just the focus on the one thing?
Kind of both.
Yeah, well, the MIA part, the massive imperfect action, I mean, when we got to deal with Tony Robbins, I mean, he talks about massive action. You hear a lot of people take action. And just what I found is that still can be crippling to people, because there, so many people that I deal with, and, myself included, was like this. We're always trying to be so perfect with everything. We got to get it right. It has to be this way. It has to be just like this. And, what I found is that nothing's perfect. Like, in fact, whatever you might end up thinking, oh, this is finally perfect. You show it to the wrong person, they hate it. You show it to somebody else, they love it. And so you just never know. The focus thing, part of it came out of that, Tim's book with the 80-20 rule, and just this idea of really analyzing, what is the thing, the 20% of actions that give you 8% of the results. And the reality was, when people, would joke with me and say, hey, must be nice to just work on weekends. And I'm like, yeah, if you only knew. I mean, I'm busting my butt every single day of the week. But the reality was, when I really took a step back, the truth is that 20% of my, actions were resulting in 80% of my income. Like, those weddings were originally like 80% of my income, but I spent 80% of my time just on all this random stuff. Now, I believe that's important in the beginning, I think, as you alluded to, but at some point in time, if you don't find focus, as you also alluded to, then you just continue doing what you said as well, which is floundering. You just end up all over the place. You don't really end up great at anything, which then what I found is people would see my work and essentially like they just say, I want that style. Like, I don't even know what they do. I don't know their business. I don't know anything about them, but they had seen something and they wanted that for themselves. And that's because we ended up having a very specific style that we stuck to for these events and workshops and masterminds and all those kinds of things. And so, it's huge, but nobody really, it was just through the actual, overwhelm that I just ended up, I had to figure out a way because I didn't sign up for everything that I had gotten into and kind of the, stress and overwhelm that I ended up, having.
No, I appreciate you sharing with us. One of the things we talk about is personal development, and you mentioned Tim Ferriss's book, The 4-Hour Workweek. I got to ask you, is there anything else you've read recently or something else in addition to that book that had a positive impact on you, both personally as well as professionally?
Yeah, there's a few different books. I love Derek Sivers' Anything You Want. His audiobook is awesome. It's like, talk about me. I'm a little long-winded and it's one blessings and a curse. But the reality is like he's just got these things down to these nuggets and these sound bites. The audiobook's like an hour, talks about how he took CD Baby from really nothing to, selling it for a lot of money and giving a lot to charity. But, he's just got some great nuggets of wisdom in there. Another one, got to do a lot with him as well, though, is James Altucher and Reinvent Yourself and Choose Yourself. I really love those books. So
no, those are two great books. And I appreciate you saying we'll put them in the show notes. One of the things we do every episode is we utilize a daily quote. And I was curious if you have a favorite quote.
This one is one I kind of made up. The worst thing that's going to happen is you get a no, and you get a no when you don't ask or you don't try. At least when you try, there is an opportunity for something good to happen. And that's really, when I reached out to Ferris and then got that, I did the same thing for Robbins. And Tony Robbins, I think that the reality is sometimes being a little naive. Depending on where you come from, you might be like, how the heck do you not know who Tony Robbins is? And other people would be like, who the heck is Tony Robbins? And so for me, I was kind of in the limbo. I didn't really know a lot about him. And I had some friends that went to his events. One was the Life Wealth or Date with Destiny. And I think between him and his wife paid $14,000 or $15,000. I was like, oh my God. Like at the time that happened, it was like 2012 or 2011. And I was like, I had very scarcity mindset, was like, that's never going to happen for me. But then I saw him announce the UPW. It's like $500. And I thought, well, I could do that. But then on top of that, I thought, well, why don't I try to do what I did for Tim? Just find an email address, send an email and offer, to do a video and see what happens. And lo and behold, timing played a large part in that. But the reality is that I didn't go, oh my gosh, well, I'm sure Tony gets a million emails from a million different people and he's never going to look at mine and why even do it? I just said, screw it. What do I have to lose? It takes 2 seconds to click send. So write it up, fire it out, and there we go. And then I was in a helicopter flying with him and his wife over New York City 4 months later. So
that's a great story, and I appreciate you sharing that quote with us. And it reminds me of something we talk about all the time on our show is the worst thing that's going to happen is if you ask somebody a question, whether it's sales, whether it's personal, professional, the worst case is going to be no. But regardless, if you do nothing, the answer is always going to be no matter what. So worst case scenario is take a chance. You got a 50% chance of somebody either responding to your email, calling you back, reaching out to you, or you have a 50% chance of them not. But the reality is if you're sitting in your home or sitting in your office doing nothing, nothing's going to happen.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So one of the things we talk about is calls to action, CTA. And I was curious if you have a specific morning or daily ritual that you can attribute both your personal as well as your professional success to.
Yeah, I find that I just saw somebody that I look up to and we've done a lot of stuff with. Cameron Harold posted this on Facebook the other day. He's like, why do I book 6 a.m. flights? And there was all these comments. And one of the only times that drives me crazy, because I seem to do the same thing, I book these really early flights. So we're getting up at like 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning. But for me, I like to wake up without an alarm sometime between 5:30 and 6:30 in the morning. I don't really have a ritual between that and then going for a walk or a bike ride. And then when I'm in town, a lot of times I walk with my grandpa at the mall, actually. which he just went into the hospital coincidentally, but he's doing better. But yeah, when I have that kind of start to my day like that, it's just it's simple. I mean, for me, sometimes I told somebody the other day, like walking's my meditation. And so just going out for a walk is a great way for me to start the day. And then from there, kind of between, 8 and 4 or 5 is kind of spontaneous. And then, in the evening, it's time with my wife and eating dinner and watching a few shows and then doing it over again. And then, of course, we've got travel thrown there and things like that. But like when I have that routine, I have an awesome day. And
I'm glad you shared that with us, because that's the big overlapping theme with a lot of our guests, is that they have a specific ritual, and it doesn't need to be something as crazy as getting up at 3 a.m. or doing some crazy
Sure.
Ironman workout, but it's the simplicity of doing the same thing in essence of
Habit. Yeah.
Exactly, it's habitual, and what it does is it clears your mind, it gets you going, and it puts you in the right frame of mind to attack your day. So I'm glad you shared that with us. So here's an interesting question for you. If you could go back and give the 20-year-old version of yourself only one piece of advice, what would it be?
Oh, man. I think I've seen this one before. There's probably a couple of ways I could go with this, but, just keep moving forward. I think that it's times, we always ask this idea of what do you regret or what would you change? What would you tell yourself? One, which is a lot of the work we're doing today, is that I think the biggest thing for me is recognizing I'm a people person. So stay doing tasks that associate with people. Like my buddies say, Michael's making money when his mouth is moving. So you stick me behind a computer and, in the video world, you stuck me behind a computer and had to edit all day long. I'd rather jump off a cliff. Now, granted, in the beginning, I did it, but at the same time, when I shifted away from that and put other people in place who love to do that, things took off. And so I just see that over and over again. It's just, I'm a people person. And so I'm not a task details, sit behind, like one guy the other day, actually, I think you might know him, Jeremy Slate.
Yep, he's a good buddy of mine.
Yeah, so we did this call with him, my buddy Jair Rodriguez, his personality consultant, and we went over this thing with him, and like right out of the gate, he goes, give me some coding software, and a computer for 8 hours and I'm good to go. And then I'm the polar opposite. Like I said, I'd rather jump off a cliff than sit behind a computer doing any kind of task for 8 hours. And that's huge. So because if I would have focused more on people and relationships the whole time, who knows where I'd be today, but at the same time, I wouldn't change anything. So.
No, that's awesome, and I appreciate the fact that you're sharing that with us also, and just to mention about your grandfather. Hope he's doing much better. Yeah,
we just found you gotta check that prostate. A little TMI, but he's going to the bathroom too much. But it almost literally, we were told if my dad hadn't taken him to the hospital, he's 80. He's been walking for 30, 40 years, and it just kept him healthy, but. If he wouldn't have been in the hospital in 5 days, he would have been dead. So,
side note is check that prostate.
That's right. That's right, guys.
Here's another different question for you. If you could have dinner with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Who's top of mind right now is actually there's two I have here. This one's even more top of mind, but Michael Keaton. I usually say Clint Eastwood, but Michael Keaton's real top of mind right now. And just simply because I was talking to my dad about this, and he went kind of on a hiatus for a number of years, really not doing much of anything publicly. But to the best of my knowledge of what I know, he was raising his kids and being their hockey coach and things like that. And now they're grown up and he's cranking them out again. And so I love that. I think that sometimes, depending on who you are and how you're wired and what you're looking at and who you're listening to and inspired by, there's so much out there being thrown our way. But at times, like it's nice to see people who like someone like him who had a great career, fell off the face of the earth, and then comes back and is rocking it again. And but priorities were, what I would say, at least from the outside looking in, priorities were his family and his kids during that time. And of course, he had done plenty to generate the revenue to be able to do that. But at the same time, like I just think that there's for me, that's something that resonates, and I just would love to have a conversation about that with him.
No, it's awesome. And you mentioned the second, so who's the second?
Clint Eastwood is another one, because for him, I think he's in his mid 80s, almost 90, and he's just still rocking and rolling. He's not slowing down. He's directing. He's in movies, and I love that. And I think that but that's what's interesting. Bringing up my grandpa again. What's not quite that much different in age. What's the difference between Clint and all that he's achieved and all that he's done and all that he's still doing? And quite frankly, my grandpa at times just being like, I just want to be lazy and be in the man cave, They grew up before there was social media or any of those things. And so it's just very fascinating to me.
No, that would be an interesting dinner if I could set up Clint Eastwood, Michael Keaton, and yourself. I don't know if you'd have any chance to talk, but it would definitely be a pretty interesting dinner. And I think those are two interesting people. And the one thing that I always find to be pretty interesting during these shows is we just launched our 52nd episode today. When this comes out,
congrats, man.
Thanks, man. We'll be in the high 50s, maybe early 60s. And we do have quite a few repeat individuals that get answered for that question, but you are the first person that has mentioned Michael Keaton, and you're the first person that's mentioned Clint Eastwood. So that's a pretty cool in that regard, because we do have a lot of repeat customers.
That's good. I'm glad I was at least unique in one way, because I found I told this one host one time that I started with paper out at 10 years old. And she's like, you know what, man? About 80% of my entrepreneurial guests had a paper out. So
really, that's
not so unique in that respect.
No, that is pretty interesting. So I wanted to ask you if there's anything exciting that you're working on or something you'd like to share with our listeners.
Oh man, something exciting. Quite frankly, shameless plug there. The work we're doing with people right now around their behavior and their personalities. I mentioned earlier in regards to, the one thing kind of, if I would have known I was a people person, I think that there's so much being shoved on us right now, irregardless of how we're wired and who we are and what's best for kind of our DNA. And so, people are gobbling up courses and personal development seminars and trainings and all these things. And it's just fascinating to see the people getting incredible results and the people not. And, all the years that I've been filming these events, you get in small circles and, you see these same people going from one to one to one to one to one to one, and not because they want to be there, but simply because they think that next thing is going to be the thing to, save them or fix them, or, that'll be the magic sauce or the silver bullet. And, I just find just like that, like I've had my rabbit trails where I try to start an app business with my brother and all these other random things that, I was doing for the wrong reasons, for one, but two, like they just aren't in my DNA. Like they weren't involving dealing with people. And so, maybe dealing with people on a large scale, but no connection, as my one buddy calls it, even belly button to belly button, So for me, I thrive when I'm around people and being able to connect and build relationships. Through all the stuff from Tim Ferriss on up now, that started in 2010. And that's really when the magic started to happen. And I started to kind of figure it out. But that's some work we're really doing hardcore with people. And it's amazing to see the breakthroughs when people can know what to focus on, per se, and what not to focus on. Because when you can just remove the clutter of things that just aren't going to work for you, more than likely, then that makes life a lot easier. So,
no, that's awesome. And if our listeners are interested in following you or connecting with you, what's the best way they can get in touch with you?
Real simple, takemia.com, takemia.com. So that's got all sorts of goodies on that page for them. That's
pretty easy. TakeMIA.com, and that will also be in the show notes. And then last question for you is, do you have any parting words for our listeners?
Just do take action. It's everything. I just, the amount of podcasts and audiobooks and books and seminars and trainings and courses and everything that we can all consume, I feel that so many people do know what they need to know, but they're so busy trying to learn and think and, dream their way into this perfect scenario that it doesn't work that way. Like, you'll gain so much clarity once you take action. And I think we're great storytellers. So the reality is sometimes we think we'll love something, and if you just freaking did it, you'd find that you actually either do love it, or you'd find, you know what, I don't. And so it gets a lot easier to find that focus when you just actually take action and make little like micro projects and, little micro commitments to things. So you don't think, oh, well, if I do this, I'm stuck with it for life. It's like, no, that's an old way of thinking. So.
No, I like that. And that's something that we talk about all the time is taking action. That's one of the most important things. You could have the best content, but if you take zero action, you're going to get zero results.
Absolutely.
Well, listen, Michael, I cannot thank you enough, not only for your time as well as sharing your story with us. And I truly appreciate everything. And I look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Awesome, man. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
To sum up today's episode and our theme of the day, building relationships, Michael practices what he preaches. He is clearly a people person, and he thrives on building relationships. In today's episode, Michael shared a lot of great stuff with us. As our listeners know, at NQL, we are all about accountability and taking action. Michael also happens to be a big believer in taking action and going for it. He shared some of his personal relationships with Tony Robbins, Tim Ferriss, and Lewis Howes. The best part about these relationships was the fact that Michael didn't know them before he initially contacted them. Who knows, he might have met them later on in life, but he didn't wait. He took action, and today he has worked with all three of them multiple times. One thing Michael spoke about a couple of times in today's episode was taking action, taking massive, imperfect action. It reminds me of a famous George S. Patton quote, "A good plan violently executed now is better than a perfect plan executed next week." So today's call to action is very simple. Take action. Even if that action is not perfect, some action is better than no action, and no action will ever yield real results. So do something today, take a step forward, and go for your greatness. And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.